In the 20th century, the world faced two of the deadliest conflicts in human history, World War I and World War II. Two wars that changed borders, politics, and honestly, the destiny of entire nations. The story of World War I, also known as the Great War, is a tale of ambition, alliances, and a single tragic spark that set the world ablaze. It all began in the summer of 1914, in a Europe that was both prosperous and tense. The continent was a patchwork of powerful empires and rising nations, each with its own ambitions, fears, and rivalries simmering just beneath the surface. At the heart of this volatile landscape was Austria-Hungary, a sprawling empire struggling to maintain control over its diverse populations and restless territories. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was seen by many as a symbol of hope for reform, but also as a target by those who sought independence from imperial rule. On June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo, the unthinkable happened. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a young Bosnian Serb nationalist. This single act of violence carried out on a quiet street would have consequences far beyond what anyone could have imagined. News of the assassination spread rapidly across Europe, sending shockwaves through capitals and palaces. The event was not just a personal tragedy for the royal family, it was a political earthquake. Austria-Hungary, backed by its powerful ally Germany, saw the assassination as an opportunity to assert its dominance in the Balkans, and issued an ultimatum to Serbia, where the assassin had ties. Serbia, in turn, was supported by Russia, which saw itself as the protector of Slavic peoples. Within weeks, a complex web of alliances and treaties pulled one nation after another into the conflict. Germany declared war on Russia, then on France. Britain, bound by treaty to defend Belgium, entered the war after Germany invaded Belgian territory. What began as a regional crisis quickly escalated into a full-scale European war, and soon a global conflict. The world had never seen anything like it. Millions of men were mobilized and sent to the front lines. The Western Front, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, became a vast network of trenches, barbed wire, and mud. Soldiers lived, fought, and died in these trenches, enduring unimaginable hardships. The war introduced new and terrifying weapons. Machine guns that could mow down entire battalions in seconds, artillery that shattered the earth, and poison gas that drifted silently across no man's land, burning lungs and blinding eyes. The scale of the conflict was staggering. Battles like the Somme, Verdun, and Passchendaele became synonymous with slaughter, as armies hurled themselves at each other for months on end, often for little or no gain. The war was not confined to Europe. Fighting erupted in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, as colonial empires dragged their subjects into the conflict. The seas became battlegrounds as well, with German U-boats prowling the Atlantic and the British Navy blockading enemy ports. Civilians were not spared. Cities were bombed. Food became scarce, and entire populations were uprooted by the fighting. The war touched every corner of society, changing the lives of millions forever. By the time the guns finally fell silent in November 1918, the world had been transformed. Over 16 million people, soldiers and civilians alike, had lost their lives. Countless more were wounded, both in body and in spirit. The old empires of Europe, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, Russia and Germany, crumbled under the weight of defeat and revolution. New nations were born, and old borders were redrawn. The war left deep scars, not just on the land, but on the hearts and minds of those who survived. Memorials and cemeteries sprang up across the continent, silent witnesses to the scale of the tragedy. The world would never be the same again. The spark that ignited in Sarajevo had set all of Europe, and indeed the world, on fire, and its flames would burn for generations to come. The guns of the First World War had barely fallen silent when a fragile peace settled over Europe. The continent, battered and scarred, tried to heal from the devastation of a conflict that had claimed millions of lives and left entire nations in mourning. Streets once filled with the sounds of celebration now echoed with uncertainty and loss. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to ensure lasting peace, but instead it sowed seeds of resentment and instability. Across Europe, people struggled to rebuild their lives, haunted by memories of the trenches and the loved ones they would never see again. The world hoped for a new era of stability, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered and the wounds of war festered. Just 20 years later, the world plunged into an even greater storm, World War II. The hope that the horrors of the Great War would never be repeated was shattered in an instant. In September 1939, the world awoke to the grim reality that peace had been an illusion. The outbreak of war was met with shock and disbelief as nations once again mobilized for conflict. Headlines screamed of invasion and destruction, and the specter of global war loomed over every household. The memories of the last war were still fresh, yet the world was being drawn into a conflict even more catastrophic than before. The machinery of war roared to life, and the fate of millions hung in the balance. It began in 1939, driven by Hitler's ambition and global tensions, as Germany invaded Poland under the pretense of reclaiming lost territory. Adolf Hitler, emboldened by years of political maneuvering and the appeasement of European powers, unleashed his armies in a lightning-fast assault known as Blitzkrieg. The world watched in horror as tanks rolled across borders and cities fell in days. Britain and France, bound by treaty to defend Poland, declared war on Germany. But their efforts could not prevent the rapid collapse of Polish resistance. Across Europe, alliances shifted and leaders scrambled to respond to the growing threat. The Nazi regime's expansionist policies, fueled by a toxic mix of nationalism, racism, and a desire for revenge, set the stage for a conflict that would engulf the globe. As bombs fell and refugees fled, the world braced itself for a struggle that would test the limits of human endurance and reshape the course of history, and ended in 1945 with the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a cataclysmic finale that brought the world to the brink of annihilation. The war had raged across continents, from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of the Pacific, leaving a trail of destruction and suffering in its wake. The Holocaust revealed the depths of human cruelty as millions perished in concentration camps. Cities were reduced to rubble, and entire populations were uprooted. The Allied victory came at a staggering cost, with over 60 million lives lost and countless more forever changed. The atomic age had dawned, and humanity was forced to confront the terrifying power it had unleashed. As the world emerged from the ashes, the lessons of World War II would shape the decades to come, reminding us of the fragility of peace and the enduring need for vigilance against tyranny and hatred. The Second World War left a scar on humanity that would never fully heal. Over 70 million lives were lost, soldiers and civilians, men, women and children, from every corner of the globe. The scale of the devastation was almost unimaginable, with entire families and communities wiped out and generations forever altered by the violence and destruction. The world mourned together, united in grief, as the true cost of the conflict became clear in the aftermath. Among the most horrific chapters of the war was the Holocaust. 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, including Roma, disabled individuals, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, and countless more, were systematically murdered by the Nazi regime. The world would come to know names like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Dachau, places where unspeakable atrocities occurred. Survivors emerged from the camps, haunted by memories. Their story is a testament to both the depths of human cruelty and the resilience of the human spirit. The liberation of these camps revealed the full extent of the Nazi crimes, shocking the world and forever changing our understanding of evil. Across Europe and Asia, cities lay in ruins. Once vibrant, streets were reduced to piles of rubble, iconic landmarks shattered, and entire neighborhoods erased from the map. In places like Warsaw, Stalingrad, Dresden, and Hiroshima, the devastation was total. Survivors faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from the ashes, often with little more than hope and determination. The physical destruction was matched by psychological trauma, as millions struggled with loss, displacement, and the memories of war. The scars of conflict were visible everywhere, from the shattered buildings to the haunted eyes of those who had lived through the chaos. As the guns fell silent, the world's political landscape was transformed. Borders were redrawn, nations were divided, and empires collapsed. The victors, primarily the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, gathered at conferences in Yalta and Potsdam to shape the post-war order. Germany was partitioned, Eastern Europe fell under Soviet influence, and new countries emerged from the ruins of old empires. The decisions made in these rooms would shape the destinies of millions, setting the stage for new alliances and rivalries. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and the world was entering a new and uncertain era. In the wake of victory, old alliances began to fracture. The wartime cooperation between the United States and the Soviet Union quickly gave way to suspicion and ideological rivalry. Winston Churchill famously declared that an iron curtain had descended across Europe, dividing the continent into two hostile camps. The Berlin Wall became the most visible symbol of this division, separating families and friends for decades. Propaganda on both sides painted the other as a mortal enemy, and the world braced for a new kind of conflict. One fought not on battlefields, but in the shadows of espionage, diplomacy, and nuclear brinkmanship. Thus began the Cold War, a period of tension and competition that would last for nearly half a century. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's two superpowers, each determined to shape the future according to their own vision. The United States championed democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union promoted communism and state control. The rivalry played out on a global stage, influencing conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The threat of nuclear war loomed large, casting a shadow over daily life and fueling an arms race that saw both nations amass vast arsenals of atomic weapons. At the same time, efforts were made to prevent another world war, leading to the creation of the United Nations and a new era of international diplomacy. The world had changed forever, shaped by the sacrifices and lessons of the Second World War, and now stood on the threshold of a new and uncertain age. The world wars weren't just battles. They were turning points in human history, a brutal reminder of what happens when power and hatred go unchecked. and even today. One question remains. Did humanity truly learn from its past? Or are we still marching toward the next war? If this story moved you, subscribe for more history that shaped our world. Like the video and tell me in the comments, should the next video be about the Cold War or the atomic bomb and the race for power?